Abuja during a courtesy visit by the Controller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service, Sylvester Alfori. Professor Yakubu noted that every Nigerian citizen has the right to vote, including those in custody who have not been convicted. He also described the right to vote as a fundamental human entitlement that should not be withdrawn solely because an individual is serving time, adding that countries such as Ghana, Kenya and South Africa already make provisions for inmates to participate in elections. Femi Lawson is a public affairs analyst and is joining us via Zoom to have an insight into this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Let's start off with the fact that there is a provision or guidelines for INEC for those who would vote, and INEC is now considering the inmates who, one way or the other, attempt criminal or not, some awaiting trial, to also be not denied of their, inalienable rights, talking about suffrage. How do you see this? Is it a way to go?
Good morning, Ibrahim, and the entire TVC Breakfast crew.
Good morning.
It is a good move to the extent that this proviso will only be applicable to people, because if you look at our correctional services population today, with over 80,000 people across the various correctional services in Nigeria, you realize that we have a very huge population of inmates awaiting trial. And when someone is awaiting trial, some for very minor offenses, as ridiculous as traffic offenses, there are some as ridiculous as environmental offenses, they get arrested, they are remanded in prison, now the correctional centers, pending determination of their bail application or sometimes conviction. So it is not out of place. It is a practice that has been applicable in other democracies, in the United States, in India, in the United Kingdom. But the idea is that in most cases, the fact that someone is within a confinement already gives some psychological infringement to some of the rights you enjoy as a citizen. And I was very excited when I was listening to the INEC chairman that this idea is being mooted purposely for the sake of inmates who have not been convicted, particularly for any criminal offense, because we must not just generalize it as an attempt to open our prison up for the people to participate in our elections. That clause has to be clearly stated, because there is no country, even in Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, that he referred to, where convicted criminals are allowed to vote.
Okay, let us look at it from this angle. For the voting to happen in prisons, politicians need to campaign in prisons. Polling units need to be created in prisons. And let us also look at the state of our prisons in Nigeria. By the time politicians and activities like that start happening in prison, is that not going to encourage the possibility of prison breaks? That's number one. And number two, is this what should be pushed now instead of trying to get Nigerians in diaspora to be part of the election process?
Thank you. There are a lot of reforms that our electoral system still desire as a nation. There's still a lot of things that we require as a people to get our electoral system not perfect, but at least advanced beyond where it is. And one of those things, just like you've rightly mentioned, is diaspora voting. And I am very sure that this is not even a bill yet. Perhaps if it's a bill yet, I'm not sure it's going to be among the top priorities of the reforms or the amendment we are seeking for our electoral acts, and perhaps, as the case may be, the amendment in our constitutions. Because just like you said, there are more important priorities, even beyond, diaspora voting, inmates' ability to vote, that are required for our elections to get to that point. As we speak, we are still battling with if we are to conduct electronic accreditation of voters or not. Today, we are talking about the workability of electronic transmission of results or not. Today, we are not even anywhere near the possibility of electronic voting system or not, because these are actually the fundamental factors that can enable other amendment or proposals like electronic voting system, like inmates being able to participate. Because in actual fact, you don't actually need a system where you take soldiers and policemen to the polling units like we see in our various communities. When you are able to do such amendment that guarantees transparency in our election, all that is needed is a number of inmates who are eligible to vote in our prisons. The electronic voting system captures their accreditation and their vote. People can vote from any part of the world as diasporans without unnecessarily casting doubt on the outcome of their vote. But as it is, our election is just a bit above manual, a bit above what someone can sit in the comfort of the room of his office or a room and write result. I think we should focus more, and particularly INEC should focus more on those very important areas of our electoral system that will guarantee transparency, and make our election more credible before we begin to expand the scope of who can actually vote or not, because even the advanced democracies didn't start from where they are today. So just like you alluded to, there will be a lot of issues about trust, transparency when you go into election. Using the correctional services now as point of vote, if you don't address the issue of transparency, I should be able to have confidence in a commission that send results from Calabar prison, from Agodi prison, Ibadan, that I know is electronically transmitted, not the one taken in a result sheet from Agodi prison to Mokola in Ibadan to be written or that can be tampered with. So that is, we must prioritize this amendment, these reforms we seek in our elections.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Femi, once again, thank you so much for joining us. But I'm coming from the angle of, in 2019, we had this conversation. In 2018, we all had this conversation, but at the end of the day, it didn't go through. So why do you think this is going to go through, this year? Because next year, election year. Because I believe that, these inmates deserve to vote. Like we have rightfully said, in Ghana, we see them vote. In South Africa, we see them vote. I think that they have the right to vote. They have that fundamental right to vote. Now, the question is, how do you think it will play out? Do you think in 2027, they will be given the opportunity, knowing the fact that this is not the first time we've had this conversation, we've had it over and over again? What is different for 2027?
I sincerely think there's no need for us to be hasty, even though, like, every Nigerians deserve the right to vote. It's a fundamental right guaranteed by Constitution to vote and be voted for when you are not convicted of any criminal offense. But the idea is that we must prioritize the kind of reforms we want. If they do not vote in 2027, it does not mean eternally, they will not vote, because there are more pressing issues that we must address. And one of the fundamental issues is the issue of transparency. So, and if you look at the prison population, we are talking of just about 81,000 or less than 82,000 inmates across the correctional services in the country. How impactful, what significant impact does this population have even on the election of a governor of any state in Nigeria, compared to the number of votes that have been used to manipulate the outcome of even chairmanship elections, state assembly elections, national assembly elections? We have seen in this country where a single electoral ward was used to determine the outcome of a gubernatorial election in Nigeria, in a state.
Indeed.
A state that has about 200 wards, a single electoral. So there are more pressing issues. And when we look at this as one of the future proposals or amendment that can be brought into our electoral system, I don't think it should be a priority. For a population of America,
I couldn't agree with you, sir, because indeed we have a number of other very pressing and demanding matters to attend to now than inmate voting being prioritized. But let's shift the conversation to our international brothers and sisters who live outside of the country. If we are now having a judgment that says inmates should vote, shouldn't we also put in the energy of bringing our brothers and sisters who live outside of the country, who are also Nigerians, to be able to vote as well? Because I'm worried about the structure and the modalities that could be put in place to enable an efficient and excellent reflection of their choices in prison as people who would vote. What do you think about this?
Well, I quite want to agree with you, and just like I said, that should even be of more concern to us, not just because about the population of diaspora Nigerians, but also because of the very significant role they play in our national development. If you look at the annual remittances of diaspora Nigerians, if you look at their impact on our economy, if you look at the impact of Nigerians in diaspora on our development, on our socio-political transformation as a country, even on our international reputation, positively like we have, because I don't usually want to dwell on those minimal negatives that people try to paint Nigeria as what it is. I want to say that it is important for such a population of people that are contributing very significantly to the economy of this country, to the social political development of this country, to be given the priority of participating in electing leaders who manages their resources that are remitted into our economy, who manages their infrastructures, some that are developed back home while we are there in the diaspora. I think this should be a priority, and this should not just even be a proposal by INEC. It should be a core component of the constitutional amendment that the National Assembly is currently embarking upon. We have a large population of Nigerians in diaspora, and I think at this point, beyond their numbers, if you look at their significant contribution to our development, particularly their remittances, their social political contribution, they actually deserve to have a place in our electoral system.
Yeah, so I'm wondering whether you think this is not another lead profession, by the Independent National Electoral Commission and the CSOs that are pushing for this, especially when they've been talking about diaspora voting. We've been saying this for close to a decade, and that's never happened. Now they're talking about inmates' rights to vote. Now, according to the Nigerian Constitution, I do not think they are not allowed to vote. But one problem there is the fact that when we allow them to vote and they start voting, they might also be pushing for running for election, from prisons. We've had this, historically in 1920, Eugene V. Debs won U.S. presidential election from prison. We also remember in Nigeria, Iyola Omishore, who also won, a senatorial district, from prison, as well as Imran Khan in Pakistan. So do you not feel that this would further push for these inmates to say, I want to run for election, and they campaign right there in prison and win election, so to speak?
No, the law is very clear. Being in prison does not automatically make you a convict. Like I said, there are a lot of citizens who are even wrongfully detained across our correctional services. Remember when this current Minister of Interior came, Honorable Olubunmi Tujojo, one of the things he did was to specifically target the congestion of our prisons. You see, I visited the prisons in Lagos, Kuje, and some other parts of Nigeria on some occasions, doing some advocacy, and charity, tour. And you sit with some of these inmates, and you realize that they are in those prisons for very ridiculous offenses that should have been resolved at the police division in their villages. But because somebody could not pay bribe at some point, or because somebody is being unnecessarily recalcitrant at some point, they find themselves in prison. I have seen someone in prison who was sent to prison for mere traffic offenses in Lagos. I've seen people who have been sent to prisons for mere environmental offenses in Lagos. These are not people that you can say do not actually have right to vote or be voted for. The law is very clear. For you to be able to vote, you have also right to be voted for. But it is only when you are convicted. You become a convict. Our law does not allow people who are convicted to vote. And the moment you are ineligible to vote, then you cannot be voted for. So there should be no fear about the possibility of people who are convicted criminals coming out to vote, coming out or rather to seek electoral position. And one thing is also this: we must understand that the the system that is being advocated for is not going to be a blanket one that allows everyone within the four corners of the correctional services to exercise their franchise or to be able to vote, or to be able to be voted for rather. But for me, I don't see that as a priority, and we must focus on more issues of transparency and credibility of our elections.
Yes, taking transparency and credibility of our elections into consideration, INEC so far has not been able to put an election together that most Nigerians, let's say 50% of Nigerians say, this is free and fair. They have not been able to do that so far. You know, every election that comes with so many litigations, mistakes here, mistakes there, glitches here and glitches there. So let us look at INEC. Does INEC have the capacity to carry this idea right now as we speak? Because now we are not having elections from prisons, and we are not having the kind of election that Nigerians will be proud of. So do we say that INEC has the capacity in case this thing goes further?
Thank you. Before I address the question of the capacity of INEC to expand the scope of, the election, centers, just to put it, let me say that in all fairness to INEC, for anyone who has been part of elections in Nigeria between 1998, 99, and now, except for some politicians who may not actually want to agree, because I've been part of these elections as election observers. I've monitored the election in Nigeria and even outside Nigeria. I've also voted as a citizen in various elections in Nigeria. And I must say that there has been an improvement. There has been an improvement not because we are already there. Even in the best of democracies today, there are always controversies around the election. Remember in the United States, the Florida controversy, controversies around the electoral college, controversies about possible interference in the election by Russia, Israel and the likes, even in American elections. But the truth is that we've moved between 1998 and 1999 and now, far from where we were. In this country in 2003, we had an election register where people like Mike Tyson in the United States were seen on our voters register. Pankane notes were used to thumbprint ballot papers. Images of foreigners, images of cartoon, images of even non-living things were seen on our voters register. INEC began a process that began to ensure transparency to the extent that we began to look at electronic registration of voters, biometric registration of voters. Before in this country, when you want to vote, all you have to do is to go and see one woman checking a particular notebook to see if your name is there or not. Even if you are not the one standing before her, she can give you ballot paper to go and vote. So we've made some progress. INEC has also made some progress, and we must commend INEC and stakeholders in the election, because INEC didn't just achieve this alone. The media has done a lot of works in advocacy for transparent election. The civil society has been very fantastic. Even some genuine politicians have advocated for change over the last 25 years. So we cannot say that our elections are that terrible and bad and that we shouldn't look at expanding the scope. We must give it to INEC that it is thriving. But as Nigerians, we must continue to demand for more transparency to the extent that our elections would not only be seen to be acceptable to winners of election or unacceptable to losers of election, but to be acceptable to the majority of Nigerians. Yeah. So, expanding the scope of the fear that people may have in an institution that could not conduct credible election, now expanding the scope of election centers may not necessarily be something we should be afraid of. Because if, as it is, we even open up for diaspora voting, somebody will tell you tomorrow that the number of results brought from America were manipulated against what was brought from Europe. But when we get to the stage where the process is transparent and we build this confidence of our citizens, all these issues are going to be so minor that we won't major in it.
Mr. Femi, if I'll come to you here, like you have said, progress has been made, but more can be done, for elections to be held in Nigeria. Sure. Nigerians are satisfied. I think we'll all agree to that more can be done, because INEC is one establishment that takes high criticism, after every election. So we need to also put it out there that more can be done. There's still room for more. But moving on to my next question is, we've said that this is not the most important thing, allowing prisoners to vote. We have talked about the Diaspora and all of that. But who is calling for this? Why is INEC bringing this up when there are still more important issues? Why are we hearing about prisoners? We've not heard about Diaspora. We've not heard about how, INEC can stand true that elections will be held and everybody will be okay with the elections. And now they're bringing, trying to vote prisoners out again. You have said it that it's not very vital, like we should not prioritize it. So who is calling for this? Is it INEC themselves or the citizens? Why are we here? Why are we discussing about this?
No, it is not a proposal originally from INEC. It is a product of litigation. And this is also the making of some Nigerians who felt, no, people in correctional services also have right to vote, and they went to court. And as we speak, the case has received judgment at the level of the appeal court. I'm not quite sure if the judgment of the appeal court has been appealed again at the highest court of the land, which is the Supreme Court. But it was not the making of INEC. It was not a proposal which originated from INEC. It's as a result of the ruling of the Court of Appeal in Nigeria following an earlier ruling, of a Federal High Court that granted judgment in favor of those who are seeking, that the prisoners, people in correctional services, are allowed to vote during an election. So it is not originally an idea, brought up by INEC. And Mr. Femi, it was a result of a judgment which INEC is trying to obey.
Yes, this issue came again on the front burner after the Controller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service Center or Services visited Professor Mahmood, in Abuja, I think on Friday or thereabout, and then we are talking about this now. But INEC right now, as we speak, had issued out, might I say, circular for Nigerians to go get their voters' card. That is part of what we all should be doing in preparation to go to the polls come next elections.
Yes, and oftentimes we unconsciously as Nigerians want to reduce the issues of our election into the business of INEC. But in the real sense of it, election is not the sole business of INEC, even though INEC is the umpire, is his institution empowered to conduct, announce results, collect results. But there are other stakeholders within the electoral chain that also have fundamental roles to play in educating our citizens, in sensitizing them, and mobilizing them when necessary to participate in the election. But unfortunately, because of the age of our democracy, I always want to appreciate the fact that it's a nascent democracy. A lot of these stakeholders have not been playing their role. If you remove INEC, the civil society, the media, in the last 25 years, no other stakeholder within the electoral chain have played enough role expected of them. I want to play, particularly, blame Nigerian political parties for being complacent, very negligent in their role in the electoral system. If you look at what our electoral system says and what even election is about globally, you realize that in fact the major task of voters' education should be business of the political parties. But in Nigeria, everything seems to be, in fact, political parties even want INEC to mobilize their supporters to come and vote for them, maybe except when they want to do vote buying and they don't get INEC carried along. A lot of our political parties have neglected their core responsibility of advocacy, voters' education. A lot of other organizations are not also playing their role. Even security agencies, beyond the election days, where you see, show up, force, parade, and the likes, some of them don't key into activities prelude to our election. So INEC has been doing well, but INEC is not achieving the desired result because a lot of stakeholders within the electoral chain are not playing their role. And I want to always place particular blame on our political parties whose responsibility have been reduced to selling nomination forms and contesting elections. They don't do any other job.
I remember the role you also played in a 2023 general election, as well as the gubernatorial elections, across the nation. There were so many issues that rose. The issue of gerrymandering, the issue of several issues. What are the main, which stands out for you among all of these challenges during the 2023 election, which you like that INEC and indeed political parties and also the judiciary resolve before we get into another season of 2027 election? Very quickly.
Well, unfortunately.
All right. I guess we lost connectivity with Olufemi Lawson. Hopefully, we actually out of time. But there's so many issues that he has touched on. Which is talking about allowing inmates to vote, saying that the Nigerian Constitution does not disenfranchise them. So
especially if you're not convicted.
If you're not convicted.
If you're just
but INEC is still seeking, INEC alongside the NCOS, Nigerian Correctional Service, are still seeking, legal framework, asking the judiciary to explain, what the legal provisions, for this.
Ibrahim, you asked him a question. What are the things you'd want to see in 2027? I want to see speed in voting. Once you come to the polling unit, vote and leave, or stand by as an observer also to ensure that your vote at the end of the day counts. I don't want to see technical glitches any longer. No.
What I say is that there are more important things than this issue that has been brought up. Important things like making sure everybody has their voter's card. People need to go out and vote than speaking about inmates voting. So I think INEC needs to look, into that direction and focus on more relevant things, more important things that will help us see the transparency of 2027 elections.
And I want to see early voting for soldiers, for journalists, for medical people.
Those one can be early voters.
Vote. Yes, we can do early voting.
All right, so let's say a big thanks to public affairs analyst Olufemi Lawson, who are giving us that keenness of insight on this very important topic. But still to come on TVC.